Welcome to the Maritime Executives podcast series, In the Know. I'm Tony Munoz, Editor-in-Chief. Our Executive Corner podcast will provide conversations with top executives concerning events and issues that are shaping our industry today. We will also bring you up to speed with the latest news and editorials covered by the Maritime Executive. Let me start off by saying welcome, Maritime Executives. We are very pleased to welcome Beth Rooney. She's support director of New York, New Jersey, one of the largest complexes in the United States, and certainly one of the most important in the world. I mean, it is the center of trade for the Eastern Seaboard, and we welcome you to join us and tell us about the complex and your path to becoming the director. Explain to us a little bit why you went to the Maritime Academy and your career since.
Wow, well, that's a lot to get started with, Tony. But let me first say, thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I'd say to me, there's two types of people in the maritime industry. Those who chose it and those who just stumbled upon it. I think the maritime industry, for those that stumble upon it, is very contagious. And you really get kind of sucked into the excitement of the business. Unlike, I think, most people who did go to one of the maritime colleges, who either grew up on the water, liked to go on cruises as a child or to the beach or what have you. I had no connection to the sea. I had no family that had served on ships or served in the Navy and had never been on a cruise or anything. But I was actually planning to go to an all-women's Catholic college and study accounting. And very late in my senior year of high school, I met some midshipmen from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point. And I just really fell in love with the concept of traveling around the world on a ship as part of my college experience. And, after meeting these guys, I, went home and told my parents I wanted to, be a merchant marine. And they're like, what the hell's that? And then it was absolutely not, because, again, it was going to go from like an all women's Catholic college to practically all men's, paramilitary school. But I, pursued the path and, got accepted to New York Maritime very, very late. And the rest is history. I shudder when I think about the fact that at one point I wanted to be an accountant and I, can barely manage my checkbook, right now.
Aspirations, yes, for sure.
Exactly.
So now you're at the academy and you're one of a handful of women, or were you just like the lone woman in the academy?
No. So I didn't go into New York Maritime until the fall of 1987.
Okay.
And, women had been, in all of the service academies and, in the maritime colleges at that point for, I don't know, about 10 years, at least 10 years. My class was relatively small. When we started indoctrination, there were 28 women who started with us. Over the years, I think there were 8 of the original class that graduated, what I'll say, on time. There were several others that, needed an extra semester, or two, and others, that left, somewhere in between. So wasn't a lone wolf by any stretch of the imagination. We're a very, very tight-knit class. There's something to be said about, the maritime colleges, where, it's a bit of a big fraternity and everybody in your class and, your shipmates and, you take care of each other. So, it was a wonderful experience. I just last night at a Siemens Church event was telling the story of my first time on a ship as a cadet, on a commercial ship, an old Sealand vessel that was 2,600 TEUs, so very, very small,
Right.
in today's standards. It looked massive, but I joined the ship at 19 years old. I had just turned 19. There were 32 crew members, and I was the only female. Uh,
Wow.
so, while and on each of the commercial ships that I went on, with the exception of a room steward, like galley assistant, I was always the only female on board.
Probably one of the most, life altering events was 9/11,
For
and you
sure.
were at the port. And your city was the center of the attacks. Tell us about what took place, how you were involved in securing that complex.
Yeah. So on 9/11 itself, while my office was in the original World Trade Center, on 9/11 itself, I was not there in the building. I was on travel, and I was in Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
At a meeting with the U.S. Maritime Administration. And ironically, we were talking about Homeland Security before Homeland Security, was the term. But I eventually made my way back to New York on the first train that left Washington in the early morning hours of September 12th. The trains were only going as far as Newark, New Jersey. Got off and eventually walked into the port, which had been shut down the day before
Wow,
in the
incredible.
aftermath of the attacks. And I walked into our administration building, and the then port director, uh, Coast Guard Admiral retired Rick Larrabee, uh, said to me, first, "Thank God you're okay." And I'm like, "No, thank God you're okay." And then he asked me, he's like, "What do you know about security?" And I said, Not much." He said, "Well, you're now in charge of port security."
Wow.
And I was like, "Hummity, hummity, hummity, hummity. Okay, I'll give it my best shot." So it was a task that afternoon. I was in a meeting with folks from the Coast Guard who were talking about protecting the ports from weapons of mass destruction. And I certainly didn't know what a weapon of mass destruction was at the time. And I'll tell you that 97% of the people around the table had no idea what a weapon of mass destruction was, but we were, going to be looking for it. So we were looking for something that we didn't really
You didn't
know,
know. Yeah, wow.
what it was. But
Yeah.
I had the great honor to be a part of crafting, what is today the Maritime Transportation Security Act in the United States,
Yeah.
the International Ship and Port Security Code, through the IMO, and the ensuing, regulations, that have been written into, the Code of Federal Regulations. And then over the years, being a part of developing the layered approach to security, the multiple
Mhm.
programs that the Coast Guard and Customs and Border Protection and so many other, federal partners, state agencies have put in place, all with the idea that we needed to not balance, right, which suggests an equality, not balance security with the movement of commerce, but really to integrate them together. And when we can integrate security and the movement of commerce together, security is not important. It's not an afterthought. It's just part of what we naturally do. And I kind of equated it to the life after the Exxon Valdez and the oil
Right.
act of 1990, the Achille Lauro event and the passenger vessel act. in the early days of those incidents and the ensuing regulations, it was a burden. Oh my God, how are we going to handle this? And now nobody thinks about
Right,
oil pollution response and preparedness, and you don't have to really think too hard about passenger vessel security. It's just what we do,
right.
and thankfully, collectively as a nation, we have truly been able to integrate security into the efficient and effective movement of commerce. So I held the role for, 14 years, was again very humbled and blessed to be a part of creating what is today a world-renowned maritime security program that my successors, continue to just build upon, every
Yeah.
day.
Well, certainly they did not give you that task because you happened to be standing in line. You were certainly qualified to deal with it. And
Yeah,
I
I don't
have
know.
to
I think the
say,
next person to walk in the building was going to get that task, and it just happened to be me.
well, I have to say, it was a trying time. I know that all of us in the industry, I happened to be traveling in DC myself, and I was trying to get home for a few days, and we were uh, all at mystery of what was going on next, and what was you kept looking over your shoulder, and certainly to get on an airplane and fly home was it was tough duty. I think it happened Monday or Tuesday, and we were on a plane Friday flying back to Fort Lauderdale, where I had just moved from San Francisco, California. So it was yeah, it was an interesting time. And what the port did was to secure international trade. I know I went to a number of meetings at Port Everglades, which was a new port for me,
Mhm.
and and all the issues and items that they took care of to secure their port, especially that complex that goes right near the apartments as the cruise ships enter the port. That's a very dangerous spot. But you have multiple entrances into your harbor. So, yeah, I through your port managed about 8 million TEUs last year. Is that about right?
Yeah, 7.8 million TEUs.
Yeah, close enough. And um, that's an amazing amount of TEUs. It's across the dock. What other commodities enter the port that your terminals handle? What is the big import or export that you deal with on an annual basis?
So certainly containers, is the largest
Hmm.
type of cargo that we move. I would say after that, the next largest is automobiles,
Okay.
both in terms of new automobiles, heavy equipment, large, high and heavy rolling stock. Used automobiles, and we're both importing and exporting the new automobiles, which is I find, always fascinating that we can be importing Toyotas that are made in Japan, and then we're exporting Toyotas that are made in the Midwest.
Right.
That's right. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just just an incredible, I think, commentary on the globalization, of trade.
Okay.
But we really are a multi, purpose port. So in addition to containers and automobiles, we handle a number of bulk and break bulk commodities, scrap metal, Belgian block, which are the very expensive landscaping
Hmm.
bricks, orange juice concentrate, edible oils like vegetable oil, cashew nut oil, soybean oils, raw cement. And of course, in the Northeast, we need our supply of road salt to melt the ice and melt the snow.
True.
We also have the cruise business, and in the port of New York and New Jersey,
Hmm.
there are three cruise terminals, one in New Jersey, one in Manhattan, and one in Brooklyn. And just until this week, when we finalized the transaction with the city of New York, two of those terminals, the one in Brooklyn and the one in Bayonne, New Jersey, were under the Port Authority's jurisdiction. What's different, Tony, about the Port of New York and New Jersey, and I think one thing that's not widely understood, is there's 180 plus or minus facilities in the Port of New York and New Jersey
Wow.
that move commerce and people, across a dock, by vessel. And of those, 14 of them are owned by the Port Authority, and then we, as a landlord, lease them out to
Hmm.
private companies. The vast majority of them are privately owned and operated. So,
Hmm.
dozens and dozens of petrochemical facilities in New York Harbor, and New York Harbor is the largest refined petroleum port in the country. But all of those terminals are privately owned and operated, and the Port Authority has no direct relationship with those.
So they lease the properties and then they use them at will.
So on property that the Port Authority owns,
Gotcha.
the operators like an APM Terminals, part of the
Hmm.
AP Moeller Group, they lease the terminal from the Port Authority. We collect rent, and then we get a fee associated with the throughput, the amount of cargo that is
Right.
moved through it. But again, those like 40, 50 petrochemical facilities in New York
Yeah.
Harbor, those are all on private lands that are privately owned and privately operated, and the Port Authority has absolutely nothing to do with those facilities.
However, with that said, what about port security? Are you responsible for the whole complex?
No, so we're not.
Okay.
So the geographic area of the Port of New York and New Jersey goes from around Sandy Hook, New Jersey, out to the western tip of Long Island, and then all the way up the Hudson River, practically to the Lake Champlain locks.
Mm.
Uh, and our jurisdiction is only 26 miles around the Statue of Liberty.
Gotcha.
Uh, so the
Gotcha.
span of control for the Port of New York and New Jersey is much more significant and expansive than what the Port Authority's control is.
So the biggest thing that happened in trade for many years was the expansion of the Panama Canal. And that expansion allowed a lot of vessels, free flowing vessels, to come in and out. And uh, from the western seaboard to the eastern seaboard, how has that impacted um, trade in your complex?
Yeah, so the Panama Canal is clearly a very important route for us. About a third of our container services utilize the Panama Canal. We worked very closely with the Panama Canal Authority at the
Hmm.
time that they were working, on the expansion, because it was important for us to time, as it was for other ports, right? It was important for
Sure,
us to
sure.
time, our infrastructure investments, to be aligned as closely as possible with the completion of the Panama Canal expansion. So, as they were expanding the Panama Canal, we were deepening our channels to 50 feet. And then we were also raising the air draft, the height of the Bayonne Bridge, that is the major impediment at the time
Right.
to larger vessels calling the Port of New York and New Jersey. So, at this juncture, we don't have any bridge obstructions, any longer. The bridges in the Port of New York and New Jersey that container ships need to pass under are capable of having or serving vessels up to 24,000 TEU. We're, of
Mm.
course, are nowhere near um, uh, ready to service those. We need to have the craneage, in order to do that. You need to
Right.
have the volume of cargo in order to do that. But the physical capability is there. In addition to that, what we're beginning to see, or what we're seeing more and more of, particularly, in the post-pandemic environment, where everybody had their eggs in China, so to say,
Yeah,
really
for sure.
moving much further away from the full dependence on China for goods. And
Hmm.
there's more manufacturing being shifted into Southeast Asia, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and the like. So with
Right,
that, again, prior to what's going on currently in the Red Sea, the further south you move, the more appropriate the Suez Canal is for direct all water service
for
to the
sure.
east coast of the United States. So, unfortunately, the activity in the Red Sea today with the Houthis, attacking ships creates a challenge for that Suez service or those Suez services. But there's a beginning and an end to that. Hopefully, I think we all hope that that will end soon. It's just terribly unfortunate that
Yeah. I,
I'll call them. The mariners on board these vessels, are civilians just like you and I. You
that's
know,
right.
right? They're not war fighters, and they're putting their lives at stake to get us the food on our tables, the clothes on our backs, and everything else, and they shouldn't be pawns in this. So
Exactly. We forget, and I think the eye opener was COVID. When people were stuck on ships and they couldn't get off ships, and including passengers on cruise ships. So,
right.
that was really one of those situations that brought the maritime transportation supply chain into play. You mentioned investment that is being done at the port, and I guess it's quite substantial. Tell us a little bit about the dredging and the infrastructure improvements.
One thing is sure in the maritime and port business is that the investment never ends.
Right.
Because you're always looking to, prepare for the next largest ship, the next slug of cargo, the newest, innovation, that would help the supply chain. So,
Hmm.
all totaled, I'd say in the last, 10 to 15 years between the Port Authority, which is investing in what I'll call the public common user infrastructure, the channels, the roadways, the railway. We've invested, well over $3 billion. And at the
Wow.
same time, our terminal operators have invested over $3 billion. And that investment is inside the gate. So the investment of the terminal operators is on the latest and greatest cranes, is on new gate systems and new cargo handling equipment that is all more sustainable, faster,
Hmm.
more efficient. So there's a constant investment in the port and in our terminals. In terms of things that are going on right now, just within the last 2 weeks, we signed an agreement with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to further deepen our channels to 55 feet and
Okay.
to widen them where necessary. That would allow for some more efficiencies and some more capacity in the waterway. So we signed an agreement with the Army Corps last week to advance what is known as the PED stage, the project engineering and design.
Okay.
Uh, so that project engineering and design phase now is underway, and that will help us fine tune the schedule, fine tune the cost, and get us full design. And
I think we left off at infrastructure. Sorry.
yeah. So the harbor deepening and channel improvement project that we're working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on, this PED stage that we are now in, project engineering and design, will allow the Army Corps to get to a better sense as to the cost and schedule of the project. And we'll also be able to have the design drawings and the biddable documents for the first constructible element. which will be a turning basin outside of the Port Newark and Elizabeth Port Authority marine terminals. So that's now underway, and we're excited to see where that will all come out. It's going to be years in the making. It was almost 20 years to deepen to 50 feet.
Mhm.
I don't think it'll be 20 years, probably closer to 13 or 14, but we'll get a fine handle on that in the next 2 years, I would say. So in addition to the harbor deepening project, again, Port Authority works on the common infrastructure. So we've got a roadway project underway known as the Port Street Corridor Improvement Project. There's basically two ways in and out of the Newark and Elizabeth complex, one on the north, one on the south. But those roadways were originally designed 50, 60, 70 years ago, and not
Mhm.
designed for trucks of the size that they are today. So we're realigning the entire Port Street corridor, including the removal and replacement of a bridge that goes over the New Jersey Turnpike and over the rail lines underneath, and is again the main access point into the port. So that's underway now. It's in construction, both Port Authority funded, and we were able to get one of the U.S. Maritime Administration grants to help assist with that. On the rail side, we're working on a project called the Southbound Connector. We have 4 on-dock rail facilities spread across our network. Those on-dock rail facilities collectively have the capacity to move 1.5 million lifts. And
Wow.
with our services from Norfolk Southern and CSX, we're reaching the likes of Chicago, Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Kansas City, into Eastern New York, Eastern Canada, upstate New York, and New England. But all those trains leave those facilities by essentially making a right-hand turn and going out to the north. This southbound connector will allow one of the terminals, and the largest, to have their trains go out to the left and to the south, and basically bypass an area of congestion. And in doing that, will provide additional capacity and additional fluidity for our rail customers and that discretionary market, particularly in the Midwest that we serve. The last, I think, big piece of investment that's going on now is with regards to rebuilding the wharf infrastructure. And the wharf infrastructure, again, infrastructure that's 70, 80 years old in some locations, built on wood and timber piles that in the past were sturdy and would last for many, 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 many decades. But as the water quality in New York Harbor has improved, and other harbors, but as the water quality in the
That's right.
harbor has improved, it's given life to the marine borer, this tiny little worm creature that bores themselves into the wooden piles and starts to eat away at them from the inside out. So we've got to replace the infrastructure, and that has given way to new ways of building the wharf infrastructure, and doing away with the wooden piles of the past.
Tell us about your port framework for port performance. That's something that you sort of created, and tell us more about what that's all about.
Yeah, so there was a time just about 10 years ago, it'll be 10 years in December, that the port had gone through a period of several months of what was the worst congestion in our history, including worse than anything we experienced during the pandemic. And again, Rick Larrabee, who was still the port director at the time, just started to talk to me about some of the issues and what he thought the solutions were. And I was very familiar with the pathway that he was suggesting, and thought wasn't the best approach. I didn't know what the answer was, but I told him I would think about it over the weekend, and we'd talk about it on Monday. And on Monday morning, I presented a white paper about how we could move forward. And that concept which became the Port Performance Task Force, was initially a 6-month concentrated study effort. And the supply chain at the time was very siloed, and nobody really knew outside of your sector, terminals, labor, trucking, warehousing, how the whole supply chain and how the whole ecosystem worked together and inextricably. So the concept was really to start breaking down those silos with an understanding that when one aspect of the industry is not working well, the entire industry suffers. And therefore, if we all work together, for the good of the whole,
Right.
we'll all thrive, and prosper. So we partnered with the New York Shipping Association, today the Shipping Association of New York and New Jersey, to co-chair this group. And we invited stakeholders from every sector of the industry to come together and take off the hat of your employer and put on the hat of your sector. So speak on behalf of terminal operations, speak on behalf of ocean carriers, but not on who you get your paycheck from. And after a 6-month study, we produced a report with about 23 recommendations. And the top recommendation was that we needed to keep this forum going, and we needed to keep talking with each other, and trying to stay ahead of the curve, and to try to be proactive and not always be in a reactive state. So we rebranded as the Council on Port Performance, which has been going strong now for 9 years, almost 9.5 years. And we meet regularly. Those same stakeholders, the people have come and gone over the years,
Sure.
but it's all designed to identify the recommendations on how the supply chain can work better with each other. So just 2 weeks ago, we launched a working group, a Council on Port Performance working group on truck reservation systems. And 2 of our terminals use reservation systems or appointment systems today. They provide value to the terminal operators. They provide value to the trucking community. They also create some pain points for the trucking community and their customers, the shippers. So what we want to do through this working group is work through what is the best way that reservation systems should work in a port as ours with 6 different terminals. And most importantly, Tony, how do we get to the point, because the truckers are serving a warehouse where they're required to have an appointment, and how do we back that appointment into an appointment at a terminal? Again, to make the entire supply chain more efficient. Because what the pandemic showed us is a glimpse into the future. And we did the volume in 2022 that we did not forecast doing until 2030. Right? So
Wow.
we now know what the future has in store for us. And when we get back to doing 9.5 million TEUs, things are going to be very, very tight, and things start to slow down. So we have to use the 6 years that we have now to where we expect our normal growth to continue, and we get back to where we always expected we would be in 2030. But we now know that if we don't change things between now and 2030, the system isn't going to be working well. And we're going to have congestion, and we're going to have ship delays, and we're going to have long turn times, and all those other things. So we're using this time now to prepare for what we know is coming.
I think this is important for everyone, and I want to see how bigger ships decarbonization. It has a great impact. It's like what everybody is talking about today. But how are you dealing with the bigger ships? Now, you were talking about 24,000 TEU ships moving across the Pacific right now, you have not yet to deal with them, but you're building that infrastructure in order to deal with them. So they're coming. But we are addressing decarbonization throughout the industry with new fuels and hybrids and things of that nature. I think you're in an urban area,
We are.
and you have millions of people right there at your doorstep. I know that when I was a young steamship line salesman in Los Angeles, the people in San Pedro were being, so they were picking up diseases from the ships. That that was addressed by the
Right.
industry, and you're in an urban area. The shipping industry is taking care of that. But tell me more about what you're doing as a port, because you're probably one of the major ports. You are the major port on the East Coast, but one of the major ports in the United States. And what you dictate to the shipping industry has a big impact across the board. So tell us a little
Yeah.
bit more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, so sustainability is a huge imperative for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and something that the Port of New York and New Jersey has been working on going back to 2009. And in 2009, we voluntarily created a clean air strategy to help reduce the emissions that the port generated. And I'll tell you, at the time, Tony, the focus was mostly on criteria air pollutants, those things that affected the
Mhm.
health of our neighbors, in those urban environments, nitrogen oxide, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, and others. But now, we've not we, but the collective, has made a shift to being more focused on greenhouse gas, and the
Mhm.
effect that that has, on the global warming, the El Nino, El Nina, type thing. So we have a number of programs in place. We have been providing for well over a decade cash incentives to truck drivers to get them into new trucks that are less dirty, less polluting. We have retrofitted engines of ferry vessels and tugboat vessels. We have helped the container terminal operators with pilot programs for new cargo handling equipment that's using, alternative fuels and alternative energy. And on the vessel side, we were the first, and right now it's still the only shore power system in the Port of New York and New Jersey at the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal that was installed for the Cunard Line vessels, the Queens. And then we've been providing incentives to the ocean carriers to slow down to 10 knots or less within 20 miles of the coast of New York and New Jersey. Also provides an ancillary benefit for the North Atlantic right whale, and hopefully
Mhm.
to reduce whale strikes. And then an additional incentive if you burn ultra low sulfur fuel. And now, most recently, we added a bonus incentive if you're burning a clean energy, a hydrogen, a methanol, an LNG, and the like. So it's a challenging situation. The good news for us naturally is that with the Panama Canal and the transference of the Suez Canal without the Houthis, the larger ships coming to the port of New York and New Jersey, most of them, vast majority of them, are ships that were built, post 2015, where they have the dual fuel capability. They are naturally cleaner, and less, pollutant. But we still have more to go. The
Mhm.
cost of shore power infrastructure is very, very high. We need to carefully evaluate, the cost benefit of putting in shore power infrastructure. Can the grid handle it? I know my counterparts on the West Coast, have they get told to shut down the shore power, when there's, too much energy, being drawn, from the system. But we need to weigh those issues with, the fact that ships are, beginning to burn, alternative fuels. And then we need to really start looking at what's the supply of those alternative fuels, particularly in the Port of New York, New Jersey. We are a large bunkering port. Again, not something that the port authority is directly in control over, but what's the supply of those alternative marine fuels going to be? And more importantly, and most importantly, we need to be prepared as a broader community for an incident that might occur with those broader fuels. Whether it's a spill, or
Certainly.
a fire, an explosion, or what have you. So, we need to prepare for those.
So finally, let me ask you the question. You as a port director, Baltimore was a big incident, and I know the people there, and I've talked to the people there, and what gives you a nightmare, and what precautions are you taking for whether it's tank or vessel escorts or shoring up the infrastructure?
Yeah. Well, it certainly is a horrible tragedy,
Yes,
and our hearts and prayers still go out, to the people in the Port of Baltimore and the families of those, that were lost. We within hours, of the incident, I was, texting and calling and emailing, the port director, Jonathan Daniels, offering our assistance in whatever it is, that he might need. Um, Naturally, many of the ships that call the Port of Baltimore also call the Port of New York and New Jersey, both in
that's
the
right.
container trade and the automobile trade. So we that afternoon we were removing cargo from ships that were destined to Baltimore. And we started to immediately begin to figure out how do we process truck drivers from Baltimore who would need to be coming up here to, get their cargo, and working with both CSX and Norfolk Southern again in order to get the cargo back down to Baltimore. But in terms of the infrastructure issue, and this is not a commentary on the what happened or how it happened, right? That's all going to play out,
That's
in the
right.
next couple of years, of investigations. But um, I can tell you that our geology helps us in that the Port of New York and New Jersey is only naturally 15 or 16 feet deep. So as you begin to stray from a navigational channel, you
Mhm.
hit bedrock, and you're likely to hit bedrock before you hit a bridge abutment or a bridge tower. I'll also say that many of the bridges in the harbor are owned by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and with our multimodal focus, those bridge abutments have either already been protected with fenders and caissons, and or they're on land, and well outside of the channel. So we're confident that the geology and the infrastructure that's in place, along with the pilots in New York Harbor and the Coast Guard Vessel Traffic Service. So the Coast Guard Vessel
Mhm.
Traffic Service,
Very
I
good.
believe it's still only 13 ports in the country that have a vessel traffic service, basically an air traffic control.
Right.
Um, but in partnership with the Coast Guard, our pilots, both our bar pilots and our docking pilots, have worked to develop a set of procedures for the passage of vessels, and when and where the tugboats join the vessels, and when they get released. And they don't get released in our case, until after the vessels have passed obstructions. So I think the Port of New York and New Jersey and our, again, Coast Guard and pilots and what we call the Deep Draft Navigation Committee has put a robust set of policies and procedures in place. They're regularly reviewed and exercised, and I think we've got the right layers of protection in place to prevent something like that from happening.
Yeah, tragic incident, and and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me tonight.
Really important port. You're remarkable person, executive, and we have had the pleasure to spend a little bit of time with you. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you again.